They overlooked her, ignored her, interrupted her, took her kindness for weakness, her empathy for naivety, her silence for submission. They smiled in her face while stepping on her back, and for years she let them, because she was taught to be nice, to keep the peace, to bite her tongue, to smile even when it hurt. But not anymore, because 2025 is not the year of the nice girl. This is the year she wakes up. This is the year she burns the script they handed her and writes her own damn story. You see, there's a cost to being the nice girl, and it's not just emotional exhaustion or quiet frustration. It's lost promotions, unhealthy relationships, muted dreams, and a growing resentment that eats her alive while everyone else walks away unharmed. She was taught from day one that being nice was the key. That if she just smiled more, said the right things, didn't stir the pot, she'd be accepted, she'd be loved. That if she avoided conflict, people would appreciate her. But no one told her the cost. No one told her that being the nice girl would come with an invisible price tag that grew heavier year after year. Because every time she silenced her opinion to keep the peace, every time she took on more than she should have just to be agreeable, every time she smiled through someone's disrespect, she wasn't gaining approval, she was losing herself. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. That's what they don't tell you about being nice. They don't tell you that it's not actually free. It drains your energy. It erodes your identity. It forces you to mold yourself into someone else's expectations until you don't even recognize your own reflection. And it doesn't stop at one compromise. It multiplies. You give an inch, they take a mile. You overlook one offense, they start to think you'll overlook them all. Being nice becomes your cage. You start to think that speaking your truth makes you difficult. That having standards makes you intimidating. That standing up for yourself means you're too much. But here's the truth most women discover far too late. Niceness doesn't guarantee love. It doesn't guarantee loyalty. It doesn't guarantee respect. In fact, it often guarantees the opposite. Because when you constantly sacrifice your needs for others, they start to believe you don't have any. When you act like you don't matter, people believe you don't. So if you've been taught that nice equals safe, you've been lied to. Being nice won't protect you from betrayal. It won't shield you from judgment. It won't stop people from taking advantage of you. All it does is make you easier to control, easier to dismiss, and easier to forget. In 2025 that ends. She used to think that being kind meant staying quiet, that compassion meant staying small, that the more she tolerated, the stronger she was. But let's be clear, kindness is not weakness, and we need to stop confusing the two. There's nothing strong about being passive. There's nothing noble about letting people walk all over you just to avoid confrontation. That's not grace. That's self-abandonment disguised as virtue. Being kind is powerful when it's rooted in self-respect, when you choose to lead with integrity, but also know when to draw the line. But the nice girl, she doesn't draw the line, she erases it. She gives and gives and gives, until there's nothing left of her but fragments of someone else's expectations. And the worst part, she convinces herself that this is what makes her a good person. But being good doesn't mean being silent. Being kind doesn't mean being used. There's real strength in looking someone in the eye and saying, "I care. But I won't let you treat me like that." There's courage in showing up with empathy, but also with backbone. Because if you don't hold your ground, no one's going to hold it for you. You don't owe anyone your passivity in exchange for peace, and you're not doing the world a favor by playing small just to avoid making others uncomfortable. You can be kind and unshakable. You can be compassionate and direct. You can lead with heart without letting people tear it apart. Don't let anyone guilt you into thinking that standing tall is somehow cruel. The real cruelty is asking a woman to keep swallowing her voice for the sake of being nice. That era is done. She didn't even notice how often it started, how the word, sorry, slipped from her mouth like a reflex. Sorry for speaking up. Sorry for having an idea. Sorry for existing in a space that made someone else uncomfortable. It became her default setting. She'd apologize before she even knew what for. And it wasn't because she was wrong. It was because she'd been conditioned to make herself smaller, more palatable, easier to digest. But here's what most women don't realize until they've given too much. Every unnecessary apology chips away at your authority. Every time you say, sorry, when you've done nothing wrong, you're not being polite, you're signaling doubt. You're training people to second-guess your words, your confidence, your competence, and you're teaching yourself to do the same. Watch how it happens in the workplace. A man walks in, makes a direct statement, he's decisive. A woman walks in, and before she even gets to her point, she says, sorry, I just wanted to add something, just wanted. Sorry to contribute. Sorry to exist at full volume. And guess what? People listen to her differently. Not because she lacks value, but because she framed herself as if she does. This is how power is lost, not in dramatic moments, but in these tiny, everyday concessions that seem harmless. But they're not, because language matters, presence matters. And when you start everything with, sorry, you're giving away your presence before you even speak. In 2025, we're not doing that anymore. We're not apologizing for our ambition. We're not apologizing for taking space. We're not shrinking ourselves with disclaimers before we even open our mouths. Confidence isn't arrogance. And clarity isn't rude. You can be respectful without begging for permission to exist. Stop saying sorry for things that require no apology. Replace it with truth. Replace it with certainty. Replace it with, here's what I think. This is what I need. No, that doesn't work for me. Because every time you hold your ground without apologizing for it, you remind the world, and yourself, that you deserve to be there. She used to twist herself into knots, trying to explain every no. Every decline came with a speech. Every boundary came with a guilt trip. She'd justify, over-explain, over-apologize, just to soften the blow of not pleasing someone. Because deep down, she believed that saying no made her selfish, cold, or difficult. That her value came from her ability to always say yes. But what it really made her was exhausted, resentful, and constantly depleted. Let me say this loud and clear, no is a complete sentence. You don't need to pad it with excuses or sweeten it with sugar. You don't owe anyone a detailed breakdown of why you won't attend, why you're not available, or why their request doesn't work for you. No is enough. Your time, your energy, your peace, they're yours to protect. And you don't need a reason that makes other people feel okay about your boundary. This isn't about being harsh. It's about being clear. Because people will keep pushing until you stop explaining and start deciding. The more you explain, the more space you give for negotiation. And let's be honest. Some people aren't looking for understanding. They're looking for an opening. And if you give them even an inch of hesitation, they'll push right through. You don't need permission to prioritize yourself. You don't need validation to say no to things that drain you. If it costs you your peace, it's too expensive. If it compromises your values, it's a no. If it disrespects your boundaries, it's not even up for discussion. In 2025, the nice girl doesn't twist herself into a pretzel to make other people feel better about her decisions. She doesn't soften the truth to be liked. She doesn't backpedal to stay likable. She simply says what she means, holds her line, and moves forward. No drama, no guilt. No explanation needed. She used to think that if she was polite enough, respectful enough, agreeable enough, people would respect her in return. That if she avoided confrontation, kept her tone soft, nodded at the right times, she'd earn her place. But let me tell you something most women learn the hard way. Respect isn't earned through politeness. It's earned through presence. You can smile all day, agree with everyone in the room, do everything right, and still be overlooked, interrupted, talked down to, or dismissed. Not because you weren't nice enough, but because you never showed them your edge. Politeness might get you liked, but presence gets you heard. And presence isn't about being loud. It's not about being aggressive. It's about being rooted, grounded in who you are, in what you bring to the table, and not shrinking to make others feel more comfortable. When you walk into a room and know who you are, you don't need to overcompensate. You don't need to dominate. But you also don't apologize for existing. That energy, that's what commands respect. Too many women have been taught to equate humility with invisibility. To downplay their power so they don't seem arrogant. To soften every opinion so they don't seem pushy. But when you dilute your voice, don't be surprised when no one hears it. When you minimize your impact, don't be shocked when no one takes you seriously. This world doesn't need another woman who knows how to smile through disrespect. It needs women who can look someone in the eye and hold their ground with calm, collected strength. It needs women who can be warm without being walked on, who can be gracious without being a doormat, who can be respectful without surrendering their power. In 2025, the nice girl doesn't rely on charm to earn her space. She shows up with clarity, confidence, and the kind of energy that says, "You're going to listen to me, not because I raise my voice, but because I don't need to." That's real presence. And that's how you get real respect. She was always the one they forgot to thank. The one they left out of the meeting invite. The one who did the work behind the scenes, stayed late, picked up the slack, smiled through the exhaustion, and still got overlooked. Because that's what happens when you're trained to be the nice girl. You get conditioned to believe that being helpful is enough, that staying quiet is noble, that if you're patient, someone will eventually notice your worth. But they don't. Because nice girls get ignored. And strong women get remembered. When you're nice to the point of invisibility, you become easy to take for granted. You become the one they assume will always say yes, always stay silent, always step aside. And here's the harsh truth. People treat you based on what you tolerate. So when you're constantly putting others first and yourself last, don't expect applause. Expect to be forgotten. Strength changes that. Strength is what makes people stop and pay attention. Not the kind of strength that screams for validation, but the quiet kind that sets boundaries and doesn't flinch. The kind that walks into a room and doesn't need to announce itself, because it radiates through posture, eye contact, tone, and presence. That strength is unforgettable. Women have been taught for generations that it's better to be nice than to be noticed. But what has that really gotten us? A seat at the table. Or the folding chair in the corner, just close enough to contribute, but never close enough to lead. In 2025, she doesn't wait for anyone to give her permission to be seen. She doesn't beg to be invited. She builds her own platform. She speaks her truth without softening the edges, not to offend, but because truth shouldn't have to whisper. And people remember that. People remember the woman who stood firm, not the one who bent over backward to be liked. So no, she's not trying to be everyone's favorite anymore. She's not the nice girl they forget at the end of the project. She's the strong woman they can't stop talking about long after she leaves the room. She spent years swallowing her voice so someone else could feel heard. She said, "Hoot's fine," when it wasn't. She brushed off the disrespect, laughed at the insult masked as a joke, stayed in places that drained her because she didn't want to. 'Cause a scene. And why? Because she thought that keeping others comfortable was more important than honoring herself. Because she was taught that a good woman, a nice girl, endures, absorbs, sacrifices, but not anymore. Because there comes a moment when you realize that betraying yourself to keep someone else at ease is the most dangerous habit of all. That being liked is worthless if it costs you your peace. That smiling through what breaks you isn't strength, it's survival. And survival isn't the goal anymore. Wholeness is. She used to think that setting a boundary was rude, that walking away was selfish, that demanding more was too much. But you know what's selfish? Expecting a woman to constantly give and give until there's nothing left of her but regret and silence. You can't keep pouring from a cup you never refill. You can't be everything to everyone and still have anything left for yourself. In 2025, the self-abandonment ends. She no longer ignores the pit in her stomach, the tension in her chest, the truth in her gut. She listens to that inner voice, the one she used to shove down in order to play nice. And when something doesn't feel right, she doesn't explain it away. She doesn't ask for someone else to validate it. She trusts herself and she acts. Because the cost of constantly accommodating others is losing yourself piece by piece. And if you've ever woken up wondering why you feel empty, even when everyone around you is satisfied, that's why. You were feeding everyone else while starving your own soul. She's done with that. In this chapter, her comfort matters too. Her truth matters. Her needs aren't negotiable. If someone feels shaken by her boundaries, that's not her problem, that's theirs. And if speaking up makes her difficult, so be it. She'd rather be difficult and whole than agreeable and broken. That's the new standard. She used to bend. She would adjust herself in every room, with every person, constantly scanning, constantly molding. If they were loud, she'd soften. If they were insecure, she'd shrink. If they disagreed, she'd nod even when she knew better. Why? Because she was taught, conditioned, that being likable was survival. That if people liked her, they'd accept her. That if she smiled enough, laughed at the right moments, complimented without cause, never challenged, never questioned, never made anyone uncomfortable, then maybe, just maybe, she'd be seen as valuable. But that's the lie. Because being likable is not the same as being respected. And when you spend your life performing for acceptance, you lose your authenticity in the process. You become a character in someone else's story, and the real you, the one with a voice, a fire, a spine, that version gets buried so deep that one day you wake up and realize you don't even know who you are without someone else's approval. Here's what no one tells you when you're busy trying to be liked: it will never be enough. Because the standard is always moving. You wear the dress, now your tone is too harsh. You smile, now you're not serious enough. You speak up, now you're too much. You stay silent, now you're passive. You cannot win a game that was never meant for you to win. So you stop playing. You stop living for applause. You stop living for validation. You stop contorting into an image that keeps other people comfortable while keeping you imprisoned. Authenticity is terrifying for the people who benefit from your silence. That's why they push back when you stop playing nice. That's why they label your confidence as arrogance, your directness as aggression, your standards as entitlement. Because the minute you become real, you become a threat to everything fake they've relied on to stay in control. She used to over-explain herself to everyone. She wanted to make sure she didn't come across the wrong way. She wanted to be understood, not judged. So she'd soften every truth with a disclaimer, dress every no in a polite cushion, and smile while someone crossed the line, again. But when you're busy managing everyone else's feelings, you ignore your own. You convince yourself that being misunderstood is safer than being disliked. But there is nothing safe about erasing yourself. Authenticity is power, and not the kind that screams. The kind that sits in a room and knows it belongs there. The kind that speaks truth even when her voice shakes. The kind that walks away not because she doesn't care, but because she finally does, about herself. And that's the shift. That's the turning point. The moment you realize that likability is not worth your identity. In 2025, she no longer edits herself down to fit into someone else's comfort zone. She speaks how she speaks. She walks how she walks. She doesn't pretend to be smaller so someone else feels bigger. And when someone asks her to change who she is to be accepted, she doesn't hesitate, she walks. Because she knows that her worth isn't found in their approval, it's found in her alignment with her values, with her truth, with her unfiltered, unapologetic self. This kind of woman, she makes people uncomfortable, especially the ones who are used to control. They don't know how to handle a woman who doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't need their praise. They're not used to a woman who isn't waiting to be chosen. And when you stop needing to be chosen, you become dangerous. Not in a destructive way, but in a liberating way. You become everything they told you not to be: fully free. And no, authenticity doesn't always mean people will like you. But it means the right people will find you. The ones who respect you, not for how much you tolerate, but for how much you honor yourself. The ones who don't run when you set a boundary. The ones who don't flinch when you tell the truth. The ones who don't need you to be less so they can feel more. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable at first, because after years, maybe decades, of being the nice girl, of hiding behind a polite smile, of biting your tongue and playing small, stepping into your truth will feel foreign. It'll feel risky. You'll question it. You'll second guess whether you're being rude or cold or not nice. But keep going, because that discomfort, that's growth. That's your old self being shed so the real you can finally breathe. She doesn't flinch anymore when someone calls her intimidating. She doesn't overthink every text, every email, every tone. She's done walking on eggshells. She's done being the emotional airbag for people who never ask how she's doing. She's done swallowing her voice to avoid conflict. Because she knows, peace at the expense of your truth is not peace. It's paralysis. You were never meant to be liked by everyone. That's not your job. Your job is to live in truth. to lead with integrity, to honor the voice inside you that's been whispering, "You don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to perform. You don't have to bend." In 2025, she's not changing herself to fit the room. She's changing the room by showing up exactly as she is. And if the room can't handle that, it's not her room. Let them call you bold. Let them call you hard. Let them say you've changed. You have, and that's the point. She used to hesitate. She'd sense something was off. A comment that crossed the line, a favor that was really a manipulation, a task dumped on her because you're so good at handling things. But she'd smile. She'd say yes. She'd convince herself that it wasn't a big deal, that maybe she was overreacting, that it's just easier to go along than to deal with the fallout of saying no. But each time she overrode that gut instinct, that inner warning, she was teaching people something dangerous, that her boundaries were flexible, negotiable, optional. Let me tell you this, boundaries are not requests. They are non-negotiable. You don't set them for others. You set them for yourself. You don't create boundaries to control people. You create them to protect your peace, your energy, your values. And when someone pushes against your boundary, that's not a sign to explain it more gently. That's a sign they were never planning to respect it in the first place. A lot of women were raised to believe that being nice means being accommodating. That if someone asks something of you, it's rude to say no. That if someone disrespects your time, your space, your values, you should let it slide so you don't come off as cold. But let's be honest, what has that ever earned you besides burnout, resentment, and the feeling that you're constantly giving more than you're getting? She used to say yes, out of fear. Fear of being judged, fear of disappointing people, fear of losing relationships. But here's what she learned, the relationships that fall apart when you set a boundary were built on your lack of one. And that's not love, that's control. In 2025, she doesn't feel bad about drawing the line. She doesn't explain herself into exhaustion. She doesn't stay silent when something crosses the line. She says what she means, and she stands by it. Not because she's unkind, but because she's finally being kind to herself. And here's the real truth. People respect what you protect. The more consistent you are with your boundaries, the more seriously people take you. But if you waver, if you allow the boundary to bend, just this once, you've told them that your limits are flexible, and the wrong people will keep testing them until you either snap or wake up. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They don't shut people out. They allow in only those who know how to knock with respect. They're not selfish. They're necessary. And when you stop viewing boundaries as a threat to connection and start seeing them as the foundation of healthy relationships, everything changes. She no longer lets guilt make her decisions. She no longer confuses discomfort with disrespect. She knows that saying, "This is not okay," doesn't make her difficult. It makes her clear. And clarity is power. So the next time someone tries to push her, guilt her, or challenge her line, she doesn't flinch. She doesn't back down. She doesn't make excuses. She simply says, "That doesn't work for me," period. And that's it. That's the shift. That's the line in the sand that separates who she used to be, the nice girl who tolerated everything, from who she is now, the woman who protects her space like it's sacred. Because it is. They told her to be sweet, to smile more, to be soft, to take up less space, speak in a lower tone, and always think about how her words might make someone else feel. They didn't say, "Be powerful." They didn't say, "Be strategic." They didn't say, "Own the room." They said, "Be nice." And she listened. For too long she listened. But in 2025 that narrative burns. Because this world doesn't need more nice girls. It needs women who are fierce. Women who don't dilute their power to protect someone else's insecurity. Women who aren't waiting to be liked or accepted or understood. Women who can look you in the eye and say exactly what they mean without blinking. The nice girl plays small so no one feels threatened. She keeps the peace, even when it's destroying her. She tolerates bad behavior because calling it out makes her seem dramatic. But the fierce woman, she's not here for approval. She's here for truth, for change, for legacy. She doesn't ask for space. She takes it. Not with arrogance, but with absolute certainty that she belongs. There's this lie that strength in a woman is dangerous, that a woman who speaks boldly must be angry, that a woman who leads must be cold, and for decades that lie kept women dimmed, kept them docile, trapped in a cycle of proving their worth through kindness and obedience. But now she knows that fierce doesn't mean cruel. Fearless doesn't mean reckless. And being powerful doesn't make her any less worthy of love, of connection, of respect. It just means she's done pretending. Because nice doesn't stop injustice. It doesn't protect your time. It doesn't build a business, walk into a boardroom, or demand fair pay. Nice doesn't negotiate for what she's worth. Fierce does. Strategic does. Grounded does. She's not trying to prove she's not intimidating anymore. She's no longer adjusting her tone, watering down her strength, softening every edge so someone else can feel safe. She doesn't see her ambition as a liability. She sees it as fuel. She doesn't tone herself down. She turns all the way up, because she understands now the very things they tried to shame her for. Her intensity, her decisiveness, her high standards, those are her superpowers. And when the world says, "You've changed," she doesn't flinch. She looks them dead in the eye and says, "I was never changing. I was just becoming." She's no longer performing to be palatable. She's leading, she's yielding, she's protecting what matters. Not because she's angry, but because she's awake. Wide awake. This isn't the nice girl they thought they raised. This is the woman they never saw coming. So now, the world meets a different version of her. Not the one who waits quietly for permission, not the one who over-explains, not the one who sacrifices her truth for acceptance. That version is gone. She buried the nice girl with every boundary she held, with every no she didn't justify, with every time she chose authenticity over approval. In her place stands a woman who isn't afraid to be misunderstood, who doesn't flinch when people call her too much, who doesn't bend just to keep someone else whole. She's fierce, she's focused, she's free, and more importantly, she finally belongs to herself. This is the year she stopped apologizing and started owning it. This is the year of power, of presence, of purpose. No more nice girl in 2025, and from this point on, she's not going back.